The Speed Force, an energy like the vortex in Doctor Who or hyperspace in Star Wars and Star Trek. It's an energy with a power both parallel and opposite to itself. But energy cannot be destroyed or created, only transferred. And this is going to be the key definitive structure that will rearrange Barry Allen's life forever. Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another series review. And I thought, where better to go than The Flash? The Flash, for anyone out there who likes DC comic books, is one of, if not one of my favourite superheroes. Why? Not only because this guy has super speed and can go anywhere in the world at any time, but because he is always so in turmoil with his kind of inner relations and his story and his backstory. So let me take you back a little bit. Barry Allen is an ordinary kid, as ordinary as any kid can be, when all of a sudden one night he watches a speedster come into his house, murder his mother, and get his dad done for murdering her. Barry then spends the rest of his life with Joe. Joe is a police officer at the GCPD. Joe brings him up alongside his own daughter Iris and his own son Wally West. One day during a freak storm, Barry Allen, who is a forensic scientist, begins to work about in his lab when all of a sudden he is struck by lightning and his life is changed forever. The lightning should have killed him, but due to the help of Caitlin, Harry Wells, and Cisco Ramon, they managed to essentially remind Barry the fact of this lightning that seems to have struck him has essentially changed his biology forever. At this point forward, Barry Allen becomes the Flash, the fastest man alive. In the first series of The Flash, we follow Barry as he begins to get used to his new abilities. He's not quite sure how fast he can go and if he can go any faster than he can. But Barry is very assured that he is determined to help the city, Star City, by essentially using his powers for good. However, there are going to be a lot of stepping stones for Barry as he progresses through the series. The first one being none other than Ian Barthorne, one of, if not Barry's most menacing nemesis. Another one of the adversaries that Barry will come across is Zoom. Another one is Cicada. And most importantly, Savitar is going to be a very key factor in Barry's life. As Barry progresses and becomes faster and more knowledgeable about his speed and his own history, he comes across an article from the far future that tells him that the Flash one day will go missing. Barry spends half of this series essentially trying to stop himself from going missing, and he does everything in his power to keep up with his future. However, when Barry goes to an alternate universe and comes across a bitter version of himself who has lost so much and is none other than Savitar, he begins to ask him how he beats Godspeed and a lot of the other godlike speedsters. Savitar expresses to him that he can't beat them, at least not due to his own version of events. We later then learn that Savitar is actually a duplicate of Barry Allen due to the fact of when Barry decided to go around a spindle for one of his kind of battles against Thorn. When this duplicate began to fade, he went off and created a parallel universe in which Barry Allen tries to do exactly the same as the modern one, but he loses so much and becomes so bitter that when he discovers that another Barry Allen gets everything that he didn't have, He intends to go and find Barry and absolutely steal everything from him. However, this doesn't quite work out for Savitar when he soon learns that Barry tricked him into believing he had killed Iris, but instead he had just killed one of the Wells. In another version of one of the series, we find ourselves in a situation in which Barry erases everything that Ian Barthorne ever did, especially right down to the pinnacle of him killing Barry's own mother. Barry tries to send both him and Thorne to hell by basically trapping himself in a universe where everything is exactly the way that he wished it could have been. However, when Barry realizes that people don't quite see him the same way, he realizes that he has to reverse reality exactly back to the way it was, because otherwise he's going to be doomed to live in a universe where everyone hates him. Another one of, if not one of my absolute favourite villains that Barry comes across is Thinker, or better known Clifford Defoe. Clifford Defoe is an ill man who is trapped and suspended in his own chair. He steals the minds of others to make himself more cleverer, and even tries to use his abilities to outthink Barry Allen. However, eventually Barry manages to outthink the Thinker, and after a lot of Barry's life is ruined, he finds himself in a situation in which he manages to overcome the Thinker and pretty much tell him that his thinking days are done. Another interesting villain we come across slash kind of anti-hero in this series is Bloodwork. Remy Rosso is dying of cancer, and to try and escape his fate, he comes up with a venom which he believes will help him cure his own disease. However, the venom doesn't cure him, instead it just makes him bitterly evil. Flash has to come up with a way of coming up against Remy without touching the venom and getting corrupted. Another interesting dynamic that happens throughout this Flash series is the Flash actually meets his own children. From Bart, Nora, Alan, we find ourselves being given hints and pieces from the Flash Museum in the future, but no actual sign of where Barry is during this time and why he is so absent. It becomes much clearer that in the future, Barry's disappearance is never fully gotten rid of. There is one part in this series before the Thinker episode in which we find ourselves in a situation in which the Flash does actually disappear for a while, but manages to crop back up. But that just shifts the timeline slightly a little bit more. Another interesting character I would like to bring up is Ralph Dibny, a guy who originally hates Barry Allen but eventually becomes his sidekick in a way. Due to Ralph getting metahuman powers and not realizing it, he finds himself in a situation in which Barry is the only person who can conceal him and help him move forward. A person who manages to get meta powers is Cecilia, who manages to read minds and oftentimes becomes really funny for the cast. So, the Flash series, up to where I've got you guys. What would I say about this series? I feel like, in my own personal opinion, Grant Gustin is the closest I've seen on screen to any depiction of the actual Flash from the comic books. That's not to say that John Weasley isn't the Flash either, but I feel like both of them are very compelling versions of the Flash, and Grant Gustin really embodies the power that comes behind the responsibility of understanding the Speed Force. I mean, we literally watched Grant's character from season 1 go from this clueless, mind-wrecked character who keeps finding himself failing at every step, to this heroine who knows that he has to step up when times become hard, whether that's joining Legends of Tomorrow, Supergirl, Green Arrow, and many other superheroes, or finding himself in a scenario in which he has to adapt after a lot of apocalypses and a lot of changed realities to the world he lives in. Grant Gustin's Flash literally ends up with no time to breathe, and that's just as well, especially for the fastest man on Earth. So what would I give this series out of 10? Honestly, I'd give it a solid 10 out of 10. I really loved watching this series, and it's a series I will go back many times and many times more to watch. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next series review. Until then, goodbye, stay beautiful, you beautiful people.